Hello everybody and welcome back. We're here in Star Trek Online with another perfectly unscientific gaming review, and this time we're looking at something a little bit more in our typical wheelhouse, a science vessel, of course. Last time you'll remember we looked at the Discovery Miracle Worker flight deck cruiser, otherwise known as the Enterprise. You can have a look at that video. I think you guys really enjoyed that, so it's linked in the card above and to your right. But let's get into this new science ship. This is the last science ship that received the Tier 6 treatment. Previously, the Tholian Orb Weaver was only available as a Tier 5 variant, and now we have this new Tier 6 variant in-game, otherwise known as the Tholian Iktomi. And this one's an interesting one because people don't normally go to the Orb Weaver for a science ship, and this one does have its place, and we'll get to that as we look forward through the Bridge Officer layout in just a bit. But first, as this is a new ship, a new Tier 6 ship, let's have a look at its trait, and that is Improved Photonic Officer. And if you're buying the ship, there's a good chance you're buying it for this trait, because what this does is it extends the duration of Photonic Officer by 10 seconds. Normally it runs for 20 seconds, so this brings it up to 30, which is its cooldown, so you can have Photonic Officer constantly up if you have this trait. When you activate it, you get 25% bonus shield healing, bonus exotic damage, and bonus hull healing for 30 seconds. And of course, remember there, the keyword bonus means this is Cat 2, so it's going to have more of an impact as just a straight up exotic or hull healing boost would. I like this trait. Next up is the console, which is the Enhanced Tholian Web Generator. I'm not using this on this build right now, but it gives us a slight boost to our healing and a moderate boost to our control expertise, as well as creating the classic Tholian web that was seen in that one episode of the original series and later Enterprise. And you can see there the web collapses for 20,000 proton damage as it is right now, and that's just not the locus of this build. It might be able to work in some way, but I haven't gone there, and that might be an exercise for the future. If you look at this set effect that it gives, if you have either the Tier 6 Tholian Recluse or the Tier 6 Tholian Tarantula, you get a two-piece set effect of 10% bonus exotic, or 10% exotic damage rather, and 12% flight turn rate, as well as the Tholian Radiation Field, which, when you activate it, is a 3-kilometer sphere. Your enemies will receive damage to their shields, as well as having their energy damage resistance rating reduced, and this is buffed by your Drain Expertise skill. So let's have a look at the Iktomi and what I did with it for our science setup. Now, you might be noticing something here, that this is a bit unconventional for most science setups, in that there's only one tactical bridge officer ability, and it is a tactical team. And judging by the description of this video, you'll probably see that, oh, we actually can make some stuff happen with no tactical abilities. Now, I'll just run through these, as most of this is standard fairly science exotic fare. But we got a Gravity Well 3, which the sole purpose of this is grouping targets and dealing immaculate kinetic damage. Subspace Vortex 3 paired with the Gravity Well deals immaculate kinetic damage again. Then we look into our Charged Particle Burst, Destabilizing Resonance Beam, which gives us some physical damage for 3 targets centered where we fire it in a 3-kilometer sphere. Or 5 targets rather, in a 3-kilometer sphere. And then Structural Analysis, which is a debuff. These 3 abilities, Structural Analysis, Charged Particle Burst, and Destabilizing Resonance Beam, all activate our Deteriorating Secondary Deflector, which you can see right here is dealing the bulk of the damage in this build, which is radiation damage. More on that in the Parse later. We also are running Tractor Beam Repulsors and jam targeting sensors, which is a bit of an odd choice, as you might imagine, but it does actually serve its purpose. If we go into our traits, we have unconventional systems, which means that whenever we use a control bridge officer ability, we get a -7% recharge time to universal consoles, and this, of course, includes things like our Delphic Tear, but more importantly, our Badlands Plasma Cyclone, which you will see used a number of times in the run. Also, the ship has a Miracle Worker focus, which on its own doesn't really have much that leans into the exotic side of science, more towards the healing and drain side, which this ship would probably be good for a drain build, thinking about it in terms of the miracle worker abilities that are available, but that's a topic for another day. I have elected to go with Destabilize Warp Core, which, as you can see, deals some radiation damage, and if that target explodes, it gives us a nice blast of kinetic damage to all foes within 4 kilometers of it, so good to pair with a gravity well. Healing-wise, we're running Ox to Structural Integrity Field 1 as kind of a spike heal and damage spike buff, as well as Hazard Emitters 1. Then we have Emergency Powered Engines, which helps us get around and resets our evasive maneuvers. And then finally, Photonic Officer, which should be self-explanatory with the trait that I mentioned. We also have TAC Team 1 for balancing out shields and clearing hostile boarding parties. Now, looking at the exact ship itself, it's a fairly standard science exotic setup. We got the particle emission plasma torpedo, which in itself is an AoE attack, so you would think that normally you need torpedo spread to spread these clouds around. But with the grouping we're doing, this torpedo actually still does some respectable work. Our gravimetric photon torpedo for the rifts, and the Dyson proton weapon for the 2-piece, which gives us a critical chance buff right here, 3% critical chance, and buffs that photon torpedo as well. We're running our colony deflector, which gives us some crit and EPG. Deteriorating secondary deflector spec'd into EPG and control, because with this build, we want to lean into control as having that our secondary focus, because the larger your gravity wells are, the more they can impact and the more damage they can do. They also work really well if you're doing an infected to just group everything with that big central transformer. Engine-wise, we're running the Temporal Reputation engine combined with the Temporal Reputation shield for its 2-piece effect, which gives us a 25% all damage buff for damage over time and hazard effect. So that, of course, is our subspace vortex, amongst other things on this build. Then for the warp core, we're running the temporal phased overcharged warp core, and we could run a different warp core here. We could run the temporal warp core in a competitive engine to get around and zip around a bit faster, but this is something that I've always kept on my science builds, is that this warp core has this capacitor that gives you a bridge officer recharge time buff, and it's just a nice thing to have along for the ride. For our back weapons, we're running the 4-piece chronometric calculations set, which, if we look at this, Ox Power Boost also gives us a buff to exotic and energy weapon damage when we activate its click ability right here. And this is something we use as part of what I call my science alpha, including this, the Tier 5 Romulan quantum singularity manipulation for a buff to all science stance, and the scattering field, which gives us a Cat 2 bonus all damage buff based on our Ox power. So these three weapons here, combined with the timeline stabilizer, make this set effect click happen. We have a RCS accelerator with EPG, the Delphic Tear for bonus exotic damage and crit severity, the Constriction Anchor, which is sole purpose is this 25% bonus exotic damage. Then our science consoles are tilted all into EPG with this exotic field exciter here for plus 75 EPG. And then for either exotic particle focusers or restorative particle focusers with a primary focus of EPG and a secondary focus of control expertise. Then we have the timeline stabilizer, which also helps us get the cooldowns down, not only for bridge officer powers, but for captain abilities, which is important with things like our sensor scan and scattering field, and even the newest science captain ability, co-opt energy weapons. Then, of course, down here, the chronometric capacitor, which plays into that 4-piece set that I was just talking about, but it also gives us a buff to our exotic particle generator skill and our torpedo weapon damage. Then finally down here, the plasma storm module from the Maquis Raider, which gives us that big, huge plasma cyclone, as well as some token exotic particle generator skill points and control expertise at the moderate level. Stat-wise, since we're running anchored, we do have negative damage resistances at the time, but this is what the stats look like on this ship. Not too many on the tactical stats. But the science stats, of course, as you can see, are here 511 EPG and 276 control expertise, and the engineering stats as well. Here's the skill tree. You can just have a quick look at this. Specializations, we're running full temporal, which provides many nice benefits, but also gives us an extra 50 exotic particle generator buff. Some of the more interesting things in the temporal spec are the causal glitch when, if we take enough damage, we'll lurch backwards, and we'll also have our bridge officer cooldowns reduced. We also, in general, with this, just like this, because it leans very heavily into science. All right, so let's have a look at our traits here. We're running Anchored, which gives us a all damage bonus whenever we're standing still, but it of course does have the side effect of hurting us. Particle Manipulator, which is the linchpin for any exotic science build. What this does is it gives you exotic critical chance and critical severity based on your exotic particle generator's skill stat, capped at 50% for critical chance and an unlimited cap for critical severity. So you definitely want this if you're going to be doing an exotic build. It comes from the Science R&D system. Conservation of Energy, which is the best science captain trait that's out there, which is a 10% bonus damage on exotic damage powers when you're hit by energy damage, stacks up to 3 times. That's pretty amazing. Menacing, to reduce the amount of threat that we take, since I can't always guarantee we have a tank. Context is for kings. In the event we do have a tank, we get a damage buff out of this, but if we don't, we get an all damage resistance. Unconventional Systems, which I already talked about earlier, gives us a cooldown buff on our universal consoles, namely, of course, the Delphic Tear and the Badlands Cyclone, and this is procced by our Tractor Beam Repulsors, Gravity Well, and Jam Sensors. Pseudo Submission, whenever we heal ourselves, anybody who has us targeted within 10 clicks has us placated. And then Self-Modulating Fire, and Fleet Coordinator. Starship trait-wise, Improved Gravity Well, which takes our Gravity Well and increases the duration by 20 seconds, but also reduces the recharge time by 20 seconds as well, so you can always have a Gravity Well up if you want. Improved Photonic Officer, which I already mentioned and is the sole purpose of this ship, for most people buying it. Honored Dead, good for survivability. Checkmate, and if we were running a ship with temporal seating, this would become Exotic Modulation. Ceaseless Momentum from the most recent lockbox, the Klingon ship, which whenever we fire torpedoes buffs our kinetic damage, and that also has the side effect of buffing our Gravity Well and Subspace Vortex. Space Reputation traits, Advanced Targeting Systems for crit severity. Chronocapacitor, ready to reduce our bridge officer cooldowns. Particle Generator Amplifier for bonus exotic damage. Precision for crit chance, which helps us with our secondary deflector. And Aux Power Offense for our bonus all damage buff. Then down here, the Anti-Time Entanglement Singularity and Quantum Singularity Manipulation. Looking at the duty officers now, we have 2 energy weapons officers that give us a critical severity buff when firing energy weapons. Our con officer, which resets our evasive maneuvers power when we use emergency power to engines. A tractor beam officer that turns tractor beam repulsors into a pull instead of a push. A gravimetric scientist, which has a 50% chance whenever we activate a gravity well to reduce the cooldowns on exotic damage abilities by 10 seconds. And a biochemist, which has a 10% chance for minus 50% threat reduction for 10 seconds. All right, so that's pretty much the build on this ship. It's something that kind of surprised me in that, we got the Tier 6 Tholian Science vessel, or the Orb Weaver, and I thought we could run this Lieutenant Commander Universal as a tactical, but I thought, okay, let's go full science on this and see what we can do. And lo and behold, it performed quite admirably, so... Lieutenant Commander Universal, Ensign Tactical, Lieutenant Commander Engineering Miracle Worker, Commander Science, and Lieutenant Science Command. So let's have a look at the run and then the parse. All right, so that was the run, and here's the parse now. As you can see here, we had 34.9K from our deteriorating secondary deflector, PET's 28.2K. This factored in from our Badlands Cyclone mainly, but also the anti-time entanglement and our fleet support and Delta call-in. And then Gravity Well and Subspace Vortex are doing some nice work there for 18 and 15K respectively. Our particle emission plasma torpedo, without using spread, still did 9.8K damage from its clouds. Destabilizing resonance beam did 6K DPS. Our Delphic Tear 5.3. The explosion from destabilized warp core 4.6. I was expecting worse, but I'll take it for this ship. Our tractor beam repulsors, and then everything else just kind of trickles down from there. Alright, so that was the Tholian Iktomi. Hopefully you guys found this video useful and you enjoyed this. This is more in the wheelhouse of what this channel specializes in, science builds. So if you found this video at all useful, please do feel free to give it a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends, and we'll see you guys next time.